Welcome to another episode of Unconditioned Mind. Unconditioned Mind is a project of Awakened, which is a movement that focuses on contributing towards gender and racial inequality. And today we are dealing with healing trauma, depression, anxiety. This topic was actually inspired by my book, where I share openly about my challenges with mental illness. And because of the response of my readers, I was just so encouraged that people were opening up to healing or needed more information. So I thought, let's deal with this, although it's not a topic I'm familiar with. So we've had sessions here with experts, psychologists, and today we have a psychiatrist. I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Kedi Motingoe, who is a psychiatrist, but she will introduce herself. Maybe, Doc, you can just introduce her. Who are you? Where are you now?
Mm-hmm. Right. And thanks for the opportunity, by the way, to come and discuss these very pertinent and important topics that I think are plaguing our society so much. As you have said, I am Dr. Kedi Motingoe. A lot of people call me Dr. Kedi, which I'm okay with. I am basically a child and adolescent psychiatrist, but I spent quite a considerable period of time in my career practicing adult psychiatry. I still do see lots of adults, although my forte really is at the moment seeing children and adolescents. I have also lately started seeing infants. But as you would know, infants invariably are one with their caregivers. So infants you never see alone, but with their mothers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe, Doc, we can just start unpacking for us this big topic of mental illness that is plaguing society. We don't understand it. And we used to think of mental illness as, those big things that people are in, confinement, yes, and they are really sick. But we never realized that the average person is also living with mental challenges. And now that it's become topical and it's something that is spoken about, people have become sort of aware. Just unpack mental illness. What is that for us? Just for our own educating.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at how even the World Health Organization defines health, it is said to not just be the absence of disease, but a state of well-being that permeates not only your physical body, but also your mental state as well as your emotions, which, I mean, the latter two being your mental state and your emotions, which impact quite a bit on how you behave and how you interact with others. That is what mental health is all about. It's about the well-being mentally and emotionally. But invariably, because a person's body is so well integrated, it impacts on your physical well-being as well. So it's something that, as you said, is largely misunderstood to encompass gross things like your psychosis, completely deranged way of behaving or relating. But all of us, in fact, I'm yet to see somebody that would say they have at no stage in their life been challenged either emotionally or mentally. And all of the psychiatric illnesses exist on a continuum. So there are very severe cases, which is maybe what you alluded to by way of mental illnesses that require for one to be in confinement, for instance, where you become an involuntary patient, where your rights are even, you can't even exercise your rights because you don't even have good reality testing. And on the other hand, it can be very mild and affect you in an intense way, but that is very personal and that other people are not aware of, but then it takes away a lot from your own well-being. And you can't maximize how you function if you are not in a good state of emotional and mental well-being.
Okay, thanks, Doc.
Right.
Now, maybe you can expand now to talk about trauma. Because even trauma, we used to think about trauma in terms of some big event that has happened to you, whether, you were in an accident or war,
Yes.
or you've been raped and things like that.
Yes.
We didn't realize that even, mild incidents may end up in trauma. And I've come to know more about childhood trauma. We were not aware that even children can develop trauma. So as we are getting more and more information about this, we can reflect back and see how indeed, we also suffered from trauma, which is why we sort of reacted and behaved in certain manners that we didn't understand. So just unpack for us trauma. What is trauma? All forms of trauma, childhood trauma, just educate us around trauma.
Yes. Look, trauma, as you said, is largely thought of as an event that actually becomes so stressful and leads to danger, either to your physical well-being, emotional well-being, or even to your safety. And that is largely what people know to be trauma, an external event. But it actually extends far beyond that to encompass your subjective experience, as is explained in what the Psychiatry Bible, the DSM-4 is. It's not just about the event, but also an individual's reaction to the event. So people usually understand trauma to be what an author that I like to refers to as big T's, which is what you talked about, maybe a war situation, witnessing a shooting, being in a motor vehicle accident, being robbed, being raped, all sorts of big things happening to you. But otherwise, even subtleties or experiences that anyone can have that are negative. For instance, a child who is neglected by a parent who is going through their own difficulties. That child, obviously, infants are so much dependent on their caregivers, their mothers, their gogos, or whoever is taking care of them, for them to be able to manage their own stressors. Now, in the absence of such a caring adult, the child experiences trauma, even though nobody sees it as trauma when a child is crying and has nobody acceding to their distress, or even the absence of important things that have to happen to a child. For instance, a child who is, say, uncomfortable in a nappy that hasn't been changed for hours, screaming or being uncomfortable with the pain and discomfort of having nappy rash and so on in situations of poverty, neglect, or that is traumatic to the child. The subjective sensation, even though nobody is aware of what is happening to this child. And children, even more than the physical things I spoke about of maybe nappy discomfort, being hungry, being neglected by a parent, even just things that are happening outside of a child's life, a highly emotionally charged environment in the family. A lot of people ask me as a child psychiatrist to say, but children don't have problems. Why would you talk about childhood depression, childhood anxiety? Where is it resulting from? Whereas they live in families that have got very highly negative emotional tones. And that impacts on a child directly, and they experience that as traumatic. I mean, before children have got the language to talk about how they feel, they have sensations and they feel what they feel. The fact that they are not able to talk about it as distressing doesn't negate it as trauma. So trauma is quite broad. It's the big T's and the small T's that and some of it is not even about what you experience, but the lack of experiencing positive things. For instance, if your parent or adults in your life say negative things to you, or do not say the positive things like I love you, things like you matter to me, things like, just affirmations and showing that they recognize you, they see you, they hear you, they acknowledge you and cherish you. The lack of just the positivity around you can lead to you, suffering from what I would call omission of necessary ingredients to buffer you from reacting to anxiety and stress in the right way.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a broken society where our parents also are broken, and
Yes.
they were facing their own challenges. I mean, I take my case, for instance, where my mother was had big issues with her own mother, for instance. And obviously that affected her and how she was parenting us. And children, I see that respond differently to the same thing, for instance. Yes. And when she started, because I was quiet and misunderstood my personality, started, being worried about me, being quiet and voicing her fears that I was not going to make it in life. I was around 7 when this thing started. It really had a big impact on me because I started to believe that I won't make it in life. And I started to, have a low self-esteem and being in this, she used to shout a lot, not just to me, to everybody. So it was a highly charged environment. And my father also had his own challenges. He was an alcoholic at some point. So you can imagine that kind of environment. We never knew, unpredictable how he's going to be when he comes through the door. Yes. You always have to prepare yourself for whatever kind of mood he's in. Just talk to us about how those kinds of circumstances impact us and how they develop into trauma and affect us later in life.
Okay, look, it goes, and thanks for highlighting, the examples you mentioned of your own family situation. It actually goes even prior to the age where you can realize and give words to what's happening. You didn't talk about maybe your mom's state of health during pregnancy, but remember that a child growing in a mother's uterus is exposed to the hormonal milieu that the mother has. And if your mom, for instance, even in that state, experiences your dad being who he is, maybe stressed and harsh and shouting over whatever it is in the house, resources and so on, and your mom tensing up, it makes her secrete neurochemicals. For instance, the stress hormone that is commonly talked about is cortisol. Your hypothalamic pituitary axis, then your mother's hormonal system gets to be deranged from the time you are even prior to your birth. So you then are exposed to operating from very high stress hormonal levels. And then afterwards, as these circumstances continue, as your brain develops, in the first 3 years of life, a child's brain develops in an exponential way, really, to almost about 80-90% of its adult size. And during that time, developing under those circumstances where the stress hormonal levels are high, even the structure of the brain and its responsivity to high catecholamine levels makes it
What
not
is that?
to
What is
develop.
that? Just explain that
The
term.
catecholamines are neurochemicals that will be secreted by the body depending on your level of safety. They are, for instance, we like talking about adrenaline, noradrenaline, serotonin. They ready you for a state of danger. For instance, what is normally called the fight or flight response that you have. So if, most of the time, look, like from the onset, your cortisol levels are high, or the system is primed to reacting very quickly to negative situations. The constant secretion of the catecholamines makes the system so attuned to stress that even in the absence of threatening stimuli, your baseline for overreacting or reacting like there is lurking danger or danger happening becomes quite high. Thus, you see even small children who then overreact to things because that system is set such that it is primed to or anticipating danger all the time. You know how you explained or described the state in which you would be even before dad comes home, even before you knew whether on that particular day, maybe it's a day when he's coming back, he's extremely tired, he's just going to greet and go on to bed and sleep. You already have got almost toxic stress hormonal levels happening in your brain system. And that doesn't just affect your brain, but the rest of your body. Because when you are anxious or you are anticipating danger, it's not just your feelings that are involved. You get certain bodily sensation, you tense up, you don't breathe like you should. Oxygen is not reaching the parts of the body that it's supposed to be reaching in the adequate amounts. Thus, the sequelae of you being tense, being experienced sometimes as pain, being experienced as, butterflies in your tummy, as palpitations, as I'm not necessarily explaining the whole stress system in full, but the sensations that you get in this instance that you mentioned, you get even though there is no lion in the house, there is no reason for that to be happening. And, at those amounts of stress hormonal levels, you get certain brain areas being disadvantaged because toxic stress destroys. It leads to, degeneration of certain structures that should be working optimally.
Okay. So, you grow up in this environment and it affects you in the ways that you describe. And then you grow up, you become an adult who have lived, with a lot of stress as a child. And so you live in this heightened state of survival, ready for anything to go wrong, because I realized that because you felt so unsafe as a child, you still feel unsafe as an adult. I mean, what we're talking about around, living in this state of being ready for danger. Because you experience this, that there is no danger, but I feel like, I must be prepared for danger, or the symptoms and emotions that are going on in my body. It's like I'm facing a danger when I know that I'm not facing any danger. I mean, I'll give you an example. For instance, when my children moved out of the house, all of them, and then I was left alone, I had this fear of danger, of being alone, which I never felt when the house was busy and all of that. And it got to a stage where it was extreme, this fear of danger. And I was puzzled by this, because I'd never experienced like a traumatic situation where robbers came into the house. Even if they came into the house, they stole some things in the lunch one or twice in my life. So I just couldn't understand this sudden fear. But after a while, I then realized that, no, this fear is not normal, because I was already on a healing journey anyway. So I realized that, no, this fear of danger has nothing to do with reality. Kind of, and how this traumatic childhood trauma and other traumas that we experience in life affect our functioning as adults. Just talk to us about how then, what happens to us later on in life. How can we identify these problems, these mental problems that we experience? So that, because the big thing is that we are not aware of them, right? Until maybe there's a certain incident, you behave in a certain way that is not rational. You can see that your response to this incident is not rational, whether it's a fight with a colleague or a fight with a family member or something like that. Just help us, understand what the impact of this environment we grew up in affect us as adults. What kind of behaviors, symptoms can help us identify that we have a problem.
Look, one of the first things that we have to be attuned to and we have to be sensitive to is our bodily sensations. Sometimes, we take things for granted, like your sleep cycle, your appetite, your energy levels, just how you experience your body. And those are some of the first things to go. You find that, look, in spite me sleeping adequately, 8 hours and more a night, I wake up feeling run down and tired. Or, I'm surprised I don't even want to eat. And I am listless. I don't have energy. Or the opposite. In the case of food, with some people, they will tend to want to eat. And perhaps thinking about it, try and make themselves feel better by eating more than they should.
What we call comfort food.
Yes, comfort eating. Your sleep patterns changing, either lack of sleep or sleeping excessively, but still having an unrefreshing sleep. Or having pain sensations that you go to your GP for, and they keep on giving you painkillers, but they have no explanation as to why you have the neck ache, why you have the constant headache, why you have a racing heartbeat, and there is all the investigations show that your body systems are functioning normally, but something is amiss, that you are, and it's got to. So I'm saying that a lot of physical symptoms can show you that. Secondly, how you relate to yourself, the thoughts that you have about yourself, about your life, your worldview, they tend to then become thoughts that are ego-dystonic, or thoughts that are not pleasant to have. You start either highly doubting yourself, or feeling like you're not motivated to do what things were normally giving you, inspiring you, or things that you don't enjoy anything. Or you start having thoughts of people wanting to harm you, or being overly sensitive, or not wanting to talk to people. So your thoughts and attitudes towards life in general, towards others, and you also tend to become quite irritable, and you catch yourself when people maybe remark about you saying, what's wrong? Why are you reacting like this? Things like that. Or on the other hand, you find that you are cut off from other people, or you keep offending. And it's not just, you can, if there is a relationship fallout or conflict with one person, or, a few people, and you can, but most of the time, if you catch yourself actually not being in good books with a lot of people, then you've got to look internally, and you've got to start seeing that something is amiss. And yes, we all develop our own ways of trying to cope. We develop certain personalities, but when it's all self-defeating, when it's all leading you to where you don't want to go, you don't get to realize your goals. You become almost self-defeating, or you shoot yourself in the foot, so to say. You want to have good relationships with your children, but they end up distancing themselves from you. They end up closing themselves in their own rooms, because they are almost, on edge, thinking, what else is she going to find wrong with me? You've got to catch yourself with such, and also be open to feedback from other people, and maybe then reach out and get a mental health care specialist, or a friend, or get self-help tools to look at what it is that is making you not able to reach your own goals, or relate to others in a way that you would want to relate to them.
Yeah, easier said than done, Doc, because
Yes.
I look at my own life, that I always knew that there was something wrong, right? My relationships with people, my relationships with colleagues at work, these fallouts that we're talking about in business, always having these fallouts with business partners in business, or love relationships. For instance, I got divorced when I was 34 because the marriage was just not working. And you realize later that it was because of this brokenness that affected my own relationships. And how you're talking about this reaction to others, when you look back, those reactions were not normal, how I used to react to life experiences. But when you're going through it, because we didn't understand, that was who you are, right? You thought that was who you are. And of course, we always blame others, that it is my husband who has a problem, and you end up living or is my business partner who is a problem. If I change my business partner and find another partner, but you experience similar things again.
Yeah.
And this whole thing of, self-sabotage that you're talking about. I mean, I used to self-sabotage a lot, build a business and then destroy it and be in a very difficult situation that was self-generated, really, because of my reactions and behaviors. But in all of this, because I didn't know I knew something was wrong, but I didn't think it was mental or anything like that, or it had anything to do with my childhood situation. So people think this is just who they are,
Yes.
We didn't know that trauma would affect our own personalities and so on. Just talk to us around. These are things that people live with daily. And they create the same problems, go through the same situations over and over and over again. And they don't do this self-reflection you're talking about because this is normal. And it's other people, it's not me.
Yeah. Look, the impression mustn't be created in this discussion that absolutely everyone has got a psychiatric or a distinguished psychiatric diagnosis, because all of this then graduates to you having an identifiable psychiatric diagnosis at a stage in your life when your functioning is impaired by the symptoms, when your family function is affected by the symptoms, when important relationships are affected. But most of the time, yes, we have the waxing and waning in life and things that we handle well, but at times not so well. Unfortunately, there is a lot, I must say, in psychiatry that doesn't necessarily neatly fit into the boxes of what we call psychiatric diagnosis. And one of the main ones, which we are talking about now, is complex trauma syndromes. There is a diagnosis that we will refer to as post-traumatic stress disorder in psychiatry, which usually would be referring to the symptoms that happen as a result of you having gone through a certain traumatic incident. But like we've been saying, you find that a lot of us, especially, let me take the case of South Africa, with our past, which is so painful, with so much intergenerational pain of the apartheid system, of migrant laborers, of so many other things I can refer to, having impacted on us over multiple generations. We don't just have an incidence of trauma, but multiple incidents as we grew up that still happen to this day, that lead to you being who you are. And whether that constitutes a recognizable psychiatric diagnosis that you have to be consulting for and being given a label and then be treated for is a different topic. But trauma as a whole, and collective trauma, societal trauma, individual trauma, does lead to deviations in the optimum way that a person should be functioning and impacts on your personality. And yes, I hear you very well, loud and clear, when you say it is much easier said than done. And then we are talking about complex phenomena, like in situations where you are talking about marriages, about business relationships, it takes more than one person to make it successful. So much as you want to, take a step back and look at your own contributions, how your own personality may have undone relationships you could have had that were successful, how it has negatively impacted in you. One has to be looking at that with a lot of self-compassion, and also understanding that these dynamics are most of the time brought on not by myself, but by the interacting pair or the dynamics of the group, which then makes it even a more complex discussion, right? But I mean, when we're talking about self-analysis and looking at yourself, it's got to be that you are the common factor in multiple settings that are not going right.
Yes.
So, I mean, without sounding non-judgmental, if you have strained relationships with your children, with your in-laws, with your husband, with your partners at work, something has to be seen as a common thread. And the common denominator here is you. And, you know, when you are in a situation where your children prefer to talk to your husband rather than you about their problems, it's got to be same at work, same with your siblings. They will talk together, but they will say, "I don't go there." You know, so I'm talking about scenarios that are like that, but I'm also trying to explain that we shouldn't be pathologizing ourselves a lot needlessly.
Okay, but what we're saying is that instead of just going through this whole cycle over and over and over again, at some point we've got to stop and say, there is something wrong. Why am I always fighting with people? Why am I always the one that people are trying to avoid, and so on? And so at that point, what is it that you need to recognize then? When you're saying start to reflect and see that you are a common trait, because I'm asking this because I went through this years and years and years before I acknowledged that something is wrong. And before I acknowledged that this something wrong is, and it's always so sad for me that when I had these experiences of fighting with business people and not able to have love relationships, I then realized that I needed to deal with myself, right? And it never occurred to me actually to seek psychotherapy or anything like that, because I don't think in my mind I thought it was a mental issue, right? For some reason. I'm trying to put myself in the position of my listeners who have been going through these things and trying to deal with them in their own way, right? So when you come to that recognition that I'm the common trait, what is this reflection? What is this realization that you come to?
Okay.
We'll talk about how do you then deal with it.
Yes.
Because I'm just trying to help my listeners to become aware that there's something wrong. And what is that something wrong?
Yes.
And we're not talking about major trauma here. We're just talking about these day-to-day things that the average person is dealing with.
Yes. I mean, look, we are talking largely here. Trauma has got the impact in people's lives of causing primarily two things. And yes, many others. It causes depression and it causes anxiety disorders, right? Including the PTSD that we talked about. But you've got to have, alongside realizing all of that you are a common thread in many things that are going wrong. If your internal state of emotions is unpleasant, you are experiencing feelings of a low mood, feelings almost, in some people, even feeling like anytime you could burst out crying, whether there's a reason, whether there is no tangible reason. And you, alongside that feeling of being depressed, maybe you have a feeling of fearfulness, whether there's nothing that is a threat, or you are not going to face an exam or a panel of questions or anything, but your internal state is a state of restlessness and a negative state. Sometimes it's not even just depression or an anxious state. It's also anger. It's also a sense of being irritable or a sense of feeling numb.
Always fighting with people.
Yes. If you have those negative state feelings almost all the time, it's not normal. Unfortunately, especially in our country, in black, I'm not saying it's exclusively to black people, but we grow up in a society where, because there was so much societal struggles, it's not even accepted to complain about your state of feeling
you are not okay.
Sad. State of feeling you're not okay. I can't even imagine if you were yourself to complain about not being well to anyone, because I'm sure you would be seen as what? How ungrateful. With the plenty you have, with the education you have, with the platforms you have, really, there are people who are starving. There are people, and that's the nature of the trauma and the pain of having mental or emotional pain, because it's not accepted as valid. There are so many that are struggling worse off than you. You are wearing decent clothes, you are eating decent food. What is this nonsense of you wanting us to focus on your feelings? A lot of children, and perhaps you can relate, we were told in our eyes that we will be given reasons to cry about. If you come to your mom or your dad with a genuine, not everybody, but at the height of their stresses, when you come complaining about how you're feeling, or you're crying about some incidents that happened at school, you would be told off and told that, listen, you either pick up your socks or we'll give you a better reason to cry. So, you can see, if you're brought up such that you are told to not acknowledge your feelings, or that there is something wrong with you when you are being honest about your feelings, and not necessarily welcome back to hands that are going to help you reorganize your feelings, help make you feel better, you are not going to easily relate to, let me see what can be done about this. Let me reach out. Because your reaching out was rejected from way back. And not because your parents were not caring, because they could not be the hands that were supposed to hold you. Nobody was holding them. They had to survive somehow. So the survival, it becomes but we've got to come with the awareness of what trauma and emotional pain can do to people. Because our society is as troubled as it is, mainly because of negating, especially young people's feelings and emotions.
Yeah. So we don't recognize, even in spite of these red flags that should tell you that something is wrong.
Yes.
We don't. And at times, even when we know that we are wounded, we sort of cover that wound because it's painful to open, because we've been suppressing this all our lives. It's painful to open the wounds, and other people. I know that, for instance, from my readers now who are talking to me and sharing with me, some would say, "Oh, thank you for making me aware that I have issues to deal with, but I'm not ready to deal with them." I suppose people are just fearful because they've been suppressing these things all their lives. It's difficult to open. I remember when I first started to deal with some healing, I recognized that I was suffering from rejection, which I denied for a very long time, because I was saying, no, I can't be suffering from rejection because I grew up in a normal mother and father family.
Yes.
So it's people who, who haven't had such experiences who may suffer from rejection. And I'm also a strong personality. I imagine that people who are suffering from rejection, sort of reserved people, I can't be suffering from rejection. But at some point I acknowledged, I remember how painful it was, first of all, to acknowledge that, and secondly, to then say, what am I going to do about it? And that opening that wound was the most painful thing. But I was just tired of going through the same cycle of things. And so I had the courage to open that wound and deal with it. And strangely enough, after a while, you do find healing, although you go through whatever emotions,
right?
Anger. First of all, you were denying it. Now you are angry, over this whole thing, all the things that you perceive happened to you, and so on, until you can resolve them within yourself and find healing. So I find that people are struggling to open the wounds. Others, I was encouraged by meeting others who said, I realized that I needed to seek help.
Yes.
Because these things were now, you actually opened the dam. And now these things were all coming up. I didn't know how to deal with them. And then I sought help. It's actually said. So you are saying, recognize that, and at that point knows that there's something you need to do.
Yeah.
Is that what you are saying?
Yes. The thing is, even if you don't, or you sit with, and I must say, it's a very difficult step to take, to initially just go and, whether it be to a social worker or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, or to open up. And I mean, you lay yourself bare, and you are even scared of yourself. You don't want to get to, these things come on, not just, emotional pain, as I said, does impact on even your physical sensations, your thoughts. It can be so scary even to you. You don't, I've had multiple people come to me and tell me that they are actually scared of their own thoughts. So they are even scared of being alone, as in, because there is this constant thing telling me that I'm not worth it, or I'm such a failure, maybe I'm better off dead. I don't know if I can trust myself to not harm myself. So it's not like it's easy steps at the most severe form of these states. But the thing is, on the other hand, even if you temporarily try and run away, you are dealing with severe, intense emotions that come to you from time to time. And they are so unbearable anyway, whether you are opening up or talking about them. A lot of people then, unfortunately, do impulsive acts to try and feel better. And this is where they will either, as youngsters, they will go or even adults, abuse substances just to numb this feeling. You are not dealing with it like you are advised to. The way of go to a professional, see how this can be dealt with, but you find a way. You impulsively, you know what? I know if I take this thing in 15 minutes time, I will be in another world. I'll have forgotten about this nonsense. Or you say you take an overdose, or you go and blow up money that you know is not supposed, just to make yourself, you go on a shopping spree, or so many maladaptive, impulsive ways of doing things. Other people go and seek a partner and have sex. And then, unfortunately, in the short term, it can make you feel you've gotten rid of the negative feeling, but it's very short-lived. The dissipating of the feeling is short-lived, but the consequences are much longer, right? And then now you have to deal with the consequences. Consequences are you now feel worse off than you felt before you did the impulsive action that you thought was helping you run away from the intense feeling. Now, you feel twice as bad as you did because of your way of escape. You either have to do the same impulsive act again to just try and numb.
Which is why people they run away from. I mean, I know that a relative of mine who has a drinking problem, and same thing, just using sex as a form of escape.
Right.
I mean, the life is a mess. And when we ask him, he would say, "But when I drink, I feel happy." And I would look at your life. Your life is a mess. What do you mean you feel happy?
To sustain the happiness, you've got to drink again, and drink again, and drink again, and borrow money. And the consequences are just devastating. And in the end, you feel disillusioned. It's too much effort to maintain that type of happiness, which doesn't come as a natural state of being, which you can get to when you attend to the pain, when you learn how to accept and deal with your feelings in the correct way, so that your basic state of being and your affect is tolerable and is pleasant, without you having to take an external, either substance or the sex or the overuse of money or whatever it is.
Or eating and all of that.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's then you're in a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And in the end, you feel completely disconnected from yourself, or you feel disillusioned, disconnected, and this is where
and your life is unmanageable anyway.
This is where suicidal thoughts come in. This is where you don't even stand yourself. This is where you, besides hating yourself, you hate others. The world just becomes unbearable.
Yes. Before we close, I just want us to talk about this whole issue of gender-based violence. It's a complex area that I don't want to get into, although I'm into gender inequality, but it's one area that is not my specialty, that I just feel is too complex. Because I just feel that, there's a root cause for gender-based violence, and then we see it escalating in our country. And I just wonder, what in your research as psychiatrists and psychologists have come up with to be the root cause around gender-based violence? Because I'm saying, and I'm not saying women are not also perpetrators of gender-based violence, but it's mostly more men in our own society. There must be something behind. Why are these men so angry, and why do they want to cause so much harm to their spouses or partners or children?
Yeah, I must be honest in saying that it's not like the research that has been done succeeds much in giving us succinct reasons. Safe to say, a lot of psychiatric disorders do happen to be have an incidence in boys and men that is higher than in women. Especially, it's well known that depression and anxiety happens way more in women than in men. Some of it is determined biologically. It's how our biological makeup, which has to do with our sex hormones, right? Making men even much physically much stronger than women. Testosterone levels come with lots of much more aggression and tendencies than when they are lower. But more than these physiological differences that men and women have, it's got a lot to do with sociology and how we are socialized. And who men are, how a girl child and a boy child are raised in the family is completely different. Even if nothing is verbally said to them, just what is modeled to them becomes a different ball game. Now, I am not, by the way, by any means derogatory of our culture as blacks, of for instance, the marital system and paying lobola and so on. But that, unfortunately, in many instances, has shown to play quite a big role. The other thing, of course, is the when it comes to the playing field not being level, when it comes to income earning capacities of men and women. A lot of women still to this day depend on men. Because of, historically, other jobs are just reserved for men. Yes, there are women now who work underground in mines and so on, but 9 times out of 10, you find it is jobs that are reserved for men because of the very so it's a multiplicity of factors that give men an edge over women when it comes to certain privileges. And at the same time, they are the ones that are physically stronger, that can lord even just their physical prowess on women. And at the same time, they're socialized to see themselves as, okay, fine, religion is one other aspect that, however well-meaning it is said that men have to be heads of households, it then, in addition to all of the other things that I have alluded to, worsens the situation where even if a woman is making sense, even where a woman is not to be ignored, because they are not the head and because they are not the one that is bringing the pennies home, they are susceptible to the men making the decisions and lording it over them. Mm-hmm. A lot of women stay, for instance, in dysfunctional marriages that are abusive, not just to them, but to their children, because then what if I leave? Yes. So it's a much more complex phenomenon that I think goes far beyond just mental health. It goes into, as I said, anthropology, sociology, all the other, and historical reasons.
And also, I suppose, women, even if we don't go for help, but we have a friend we can talk to, and men internalize these things, and they have to find a way of expressing
very
their
important
anger
aspect
on their and their whatever is they're dealing with. that they are not
very important
able to
aspect
express.
of how men relate. Because they are socialized to understand that they have to be competent. There is no place for a man even crying or talking emotions. You've got to achieve, you've got to provide, you've got to... So they unfortunately suffer in silence. And as I said, depression will not just come out as a person with a low mood that's crying, that's anxious, that's... Aggression becomes a huge part of it. Irritability becomes a huge part of it. And because they then are more prone to going to discharging their feelings in less than optimal ways, they are the ones that are more prone to opening themselves up for the trouble that comes with not dealing with your feelings. And when men congregate, what they talk about is their achievements more than their struggles most of the time.
Yes.
And we need to change that narrative. As women, in the society, we need to be socializing boys and girls in a way that makes them sensitive to the fact that both genders are human and pain is universal, and it doesn't just land on women without the men being affected. It may affect them differently, but it does affect them.
Yes, no, definitely. We have to change the whole structure of society. I agree.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Doc. We've run out of time.
Okay.
Thank you for this informative session and just bringing other aspects to this topic. As we said at Awakened, if you take time to find your true self, you will end up living from your authentic power. Thank you.